Hello and welcome to my video. Today I'll be discussing computer security, the history of the discipline, how writing is used in computer security, and finally I will touch on what the average user's responsibility is when it comes to security on the internet. The history of computer security has muddied roots. Some posit that the start can be traced back to encryption methods in the Renaissance, while others put the date closer to a more modern time frame. I'll use a starting point that is more modern, around the time where electronic systems were being exploited to do things that were not intended, since I'll be more focused on the history of securing computing systems. So, a quick quote from the foreword by Steve Wozniak of Exploding the Phone. Steve Wozniak states, quote, "Today, a lot of people are computer hackers, and a lot of them just want to cause problems for others. They're like vandals. I was not a vandal. I was curious, but boy, I wanted to find out what the limits of the telephone system were. What are the limits of any system? I found that for almost anybody who thinks well in digital electronics or computer programming, if you go back and look at their lives, they'll have these areas of misbehavior. And I think that some of the most creative people have all, at some point, focused their creativity on doing things that they're not supposed to do. But their goal is usually, oh my gosh, can I discover something? Is there some way to do something that's not exactly in the books and not known? Hackers are the ultimate example. Every hacker I've ever run into is always trying to explore these little tiny nuances of anything, looking for a mistake, a crack they can get through. And so this quote from the forward really emphasizes how creative people have an innate desire to figure out if they can learn something new and find the limits of these systems. And so if you have people that are doing it maliciously, if you didn't have any kind of computer security and people were doing this maliciously, we probably wouldn't have the internet how we would today. Nobody would want to do anything because you couldn't be 100% sure if that was true or not, because somebody could have just put it up there, and since there's no security, nobody verifies it. It would have been a lot different, but if we have people that are looking and using these mindsets of finding these small cracks, we can get people to fill in these small cracks before people that are more malicious get to them. And so the first article I'm going to look at, not really article, but the first piece of history that I'm going to look at is the era of like the phone system and these what's called a blue box. And so if you can see in this picture, there's a number pad with a couple of extra buttons and a speaker attached. And so this system was an exploitation found by a university student at Washington State University who used Bell Lab infrastructure plans in a published journal to figure out how the phone systems operate in the backend. And using these infrastructure plans, they found a critical, or this person found a critical flaw that allows someone to take free calls. This WSU student, Ralph Barclay, is named in this in the book "Exploding the Phone." Chapter 5. I'm not 100% sure if this is accurate because all of these sources that they give, I have no way of actually, because of the age, I have no way of verifying the newspaper articles because I can't find them anywhere. And so uh, this was one of the more early uh, attacks on infrastructure. The next major attack was in 1971, the Creeper system. Although the previous hack is not directly a computer hack, this Creeper hack sparked the need to secure infrastructure from exploitation. The first major computer virus came from a person trying to make a self-replicating program across the ARPANET at the time. At this time, the worm only operated over a PDP-10 ARPANET, and for a younger audience, I'm just gonna give you a picture of the PDP-10. This is back in the photo is from 1971, but this is like the PDP-10 system, and so the ARPANET, it became the foundation of the internet we have today. And so the next major virus was called the Morris worm after its creator. This worm really lit a fire under our society to take computer security more seriously and drew people's attention to how critical the field is. The worm was another self-replicating worm, but had no malicious code inside to do anything to the computer other than just reproduce itself to the next. But even though it had no malicious code to do anything to the current computer, the infrastructure slowed down or the internet slowed down considerably, delaying emails for days. And because of this, the creator Morris received a felony under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't able to pull up the entire article on my computer, but one quote from the article that I do have is, "This appears to be an uncharacteristic act for Morris to have committed, according to those who knew him well. In the past, particularly while an undergraduate at Harvard University, Morris appears to have been more concerned about protecting against abuse of computers rather than in violating computer security." And so, going straight into an FBI article about the Morris worm in 2018, a recounting of 30 years, or a reflection on the 30 years since the first major attack, um, the article states, "The episode had a huge impact on a nation just coming to grips with how important and vulnerable computers have become. The idea of cybersecurity became something computer users began to take more seriously. Just days after the attack, for example, the country's first computer emergency response team was created in Pittsburgh at the direction of the Department of Defense. Developers also began creating much-needed computer intrusion detection software. At the same time, the Morris worm inspired a new generation of hackers and a wave of internet-driven assaults that continue to plague our digital systems to this day. Whether accidental or not, the first internet attack 30 years ago was a wake-up call for the country and the cyber age to come." And so these three examples of these exploitations back in the history of computer security just highlight like the roots of it. But since then, we've gotten many more catastrophic things, such as the wanted decryptor attack that was very recent. And this is kind of these three attacks really set the roots up for the computer security discipline. In computer security, writing is employed in various different ways. For instance, there's a consumer-based view like Bleeping Computer, a news site that targets mainly like consumers and what consumers need to know about various computer exploits that are going on. Let's go straight into like a example, Docker. And so all like the users of Docker, like in this case, there was sensitive data was exposed, so users need to know what was exactly exposed and how they must secure themselves through this security breach. And so this is a lot more pressing, and the time frame is a lot shorter than most like other like times in computer security that has a lot longer of a time frame than this. Since the vulnerability in these cases are already exposed to the public sphere, people need to know exactly what's happening. So if you notice, this one was in April 26th, and the exploit was actually figured out on 25th. So there was very little time for this article to be written. And so, but once it is, debriefs what actions to take, uh, different things like that. And so this is a developing story. And so these are constantly being updated, and it just keeps a more consumer-based focus compared to like when security researchers are talking amongst each other. There's a responsible disclosure when talking about vulnerabilities across vendors. And so, for instance, if I find some kind of security exploit in vendor A, like let's say Google, I found something that was going wrong there, that was exposing some private data, I would then take the steps that I took to get to there, send that, and then also any kind of extra information that I think would be relevant. Maybe it's a hardware-based exposure, or it's a remote execution exploit. And so those are more technical terms that they would understand and be able to use in order to fix the problem. And so I wouldn't publish a paper. What responsibility disclosure is that I would send all this information directly to them, give them a time frame that would allow them to fix the issue in a timely manner, but not give them so much time to where they just neglect fixing it at all. Because the more time wasted, more time for other people to figure out this exploit as well, and then maybe more malicious actors can use it to their advantage. And so then from there, after it's fixed, after this grace period time's up, then a public paper is then published for people to see the details of this exploit, and then any other actors can fix what they need. And so that's pretty much what the conclusion of this paper found. For instance, there's when vulnerabilities affect two vendors, we show that if they choose to develop a patch, they release their patches on time. On the other hand, there's a possibility that only a single vendor releases its patch and the other does not. Unlike the single vendor case, responsibility vulnerability disclosure policy cannot always guarantee the releases of patches from both vendors. Even though the coordinator does not impose any time constraint in some cases, the vendor with less incentive ignores the vulnerability. So you've got to incent, like, in order for these, there's got to be some kind of incentive. And so sometimes with the time frame, you can incentivize, like, okay, this is going to be a pressing issue. If people know about it, so we got to fix it now and kind of move it to the top priority. And so talking about that, and then the last bit is talking more about writing of, like, in a business setting in computer security. A lot, like in the business setting, you want to let any kind of people in the company and any end users in the company understand what kind of security breaches, if they happen, what happens, and also what people need to, like, what measures need to be taken in order to secure their own data. And then also in the case of more like companies with sensitive data being stored there that employees have access to, the policies to prevent any kind of leakage in that need to be clear and trained in the employees. So, for instance, at like a hospital, you got to be HIPAA compliant. So you got to make sure your employees don't leave like computers open or unlocked when they leave. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that with my interview. Okay, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Hi, my name's Tom Cunningham. I work for Mid-Columbia Medical Center as the Information Systems Security Manager.
And so how did you start in information security?
I started in computer systems about 22 years ago and went into manufacturing as a systems analyst, and I moved into the medical field after 6 years and started out in network administration and then moved into information systems security from there.
Question: how do you use writing in computers in what you do in information security?
I think I could say that writing is important in almost any job, but in information system security, writing is very important from a communication standpoint, that end users and other company people working for the company need to have the information to be able to protect themselves.
All right, and why should people use two-factor authentication?
Two-factor authentication gives an extra added layer of security that in today's high-tech society, that having that extra layer is almost becoming an essential part of doing business electronically.
Okay, and so the other half of securing yourself would be passwords. So what are some good password habits for end users?
So password habits, I don't like to use the word password anymore, that I use passphrases. And a passphrase is arguably much more difficult to guess because you can take out the words of a dictionary. So in the old systems of passwords, when people thought of passwords, they would think of words in a dictionary typically, and then maybe combine words and sprinkle in maybe a number or something. That was kind of a traditional way of doing passwords. But in today's more modern society, I like to use the word passphrase, which is a password in length that can be kind of you could argue be longer than a regular password. And a passphrase is maybe something that you're passionate about, that maybe your passion is drinking coffee on Saturday mornings. You could use the phrase of "I love to drink coffee on Saturday mornings," and by taking, for example, the first letter in each one of those words and sprinkling in capital letters, and choosing a password out of that arguably makes the password stronger than a simple dictionary word. I also like to sprinkle in on top of that maybe a special character and add numbers, so you take in the entire keyboard per se, so you're using the entire keyboard for a password, which makes the difficulty of somebody cracking that go up exponentially.
All right, well, thank you for the interview, and hope you have a good night.
Anytime. Thank you.
So for my project, I did a short poll of my classmates, and then a few of the computer security oriented subreddits. This is focused mainly on the user side of security rather than the computer security researchers, because the analogy that I think of is when computer security is operating two different doors. You've got the front door, which the users control, and then the back door, which all the computer security researchers are securing down, so then people can't use this back door. So the front door is where passwords and two-factor authentication come into. So two-factor authentication is having to put in a code whenever you put in your password and log in. Then it asks you, okay, now go to your Google Authenticator and put in the 6-digit code or something like that. So that's two-factor authentication. So going back to it, I interviewed my classmates and read it on the front, more like the front door side of this, the attitudes that people have. So this is my table of results, but I've got a more graphically appeasing view of it. So as you can see, comparatively, I guess I'll use classmates as more of a common example of less secure passwords having shorter length generally, while computer security minded individuals have longer passwords generally. Another thing which I'll go into a little bit about password complexity of using many or more than a minimum amount of special numerical characters of the passwords. As you can see, people generally know that having a high entropy or having a variety of different characters in your password can help prevent any kind of brute force attacks on your password. Although I'll go into this a little bit later with some papers, but generally the length is more of the once you get to a certain length becomes a dominant factor in determining how crackable it is. Also, what's one thing that I found interesting is that my classmates almost never change their passwords. Personally, I don't really change my password that often either, compared to computer security researchers or computer security minded individuals. Usually change a little bit more frequently, using words in the password, which I found this kind of interesting that individuals that are more computer security minded do actually use words in their passwords, which may seem like it's susceptible to a dictionary attack, but I have a feeling that those are more salted when using words rather than just using password 123. They're doing the big red barn 23 has a yellow cow or something, and so that's it has a higher length and it has words in it, kind of adding the complexity there. Two-factor authentication is a lot more prevalent with computer security individuals, because two-factor authentication not only, so if somebody has your password, this is just another thing for them to have to get into. They'd have to find a way to also have the authentication code when they're trying to log in, or even push or a push of at ASU they have a duo push where you just press a button yes, that was me, or I'm not. There's some other places that have a slightly different one of they'll even give you a rough location of where that is, somebody from, I don't know, uh, India tried to access your account. Was that you? And you click yes or no, and it'll either lock them out, or if it was you, let you back or let you in. And then another thing that most people in my class didn't use, but most people with more computer security minded do use, is a password manager, which I think it's a really good idea, because then you don't have to try and memorize your passwords as much, because you already have them somewhere that is like, you can then just have a really really secure password that then this password manager can manage all of your other passwords. And so, like, for instance, I use LastPass. And so with LastPass, I don't have to remember, I can, like, generally remember what it is. But with LastPass, I can make it a lot more, secure by not having, like, specific dictionary words. And I can have, like, 50 character passwords that, like, I wouldn't normally remember, like, all of these random characters. But if I know like, a single 20-digit LastPass password, or not 20-digit, but like 20-character LastPass password, then I can have like 80 different sites with 80 different 50-character passwords that I wouldn't have to memorize myself. So I think that would be one thing that people could use to beef up their own security. And so, just kind of going into this is a from the NIST Gov website. Um, Appendix A. Here, I'll go to this top in a second, because it's kind of a long article. So this one talks about how password length is found to be primary factor in characterizing password strength. And so passwords that are too short yield to brute force attacks as well as dictionary attacks. And so minimum password length usually is, or I guess the password length, since it is the primary factor, no matter, even if you have, like, if you have a 50-character password, that's already going to be super secure, even if it's all like a dictionary tag, and especially when websites use what's called salting. So, like, instead of, like, maybe every other A is replaced with a character, or every other A has like some kind of symbol inserted into it. So when it's hashed, that is every single time going to be thrown in. And so if people get the hashes, they don't know what that salt is. And so it makes it even like a what would be considered an unsecure password could still be secure if it's just long enough. And then complexity, especially for like shorter passwords, higher complexity password is a lot better, but also has the drawback of, like, if you force complexity requirements, you get the whole thing of, like, instead of password, you have password one, or password one exclamation point. And so those are less secure, because if somebody already knows, like, your root of your password, they can just try these short additions or modifications to conform with whatever minimum requirement is set there, and make it a lot easier to crack. Instead of if you make a lengthy password that nobody knows except you can be a lot more secure with it. And then, of course, salting, or like sprinkling in special characters is nice to prevent dictionary attacks. And so, yeah, those are two of the main things that this government, here, I'll bring it to the top here, the NIST Special Publication 863B, Digital Identity Guidelines, National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so here's just one last thing about password memorability and security. I think is towards the bottom here. Yes, so you have people that are in a control group where they have their own password. They usually have a not as difficult of a time of remembering. And then how long it took them, I think, to remember, or to no longer have to, like, carry around a written copy. Is this weeks? How long did you have to carry down a written copy? How hard did you find it to memorize your password? And so that's what these other two columns are. And as you can see down here, many members of the random character group still carried written copies of their passwords at the time of the survey, indicating that they hadn't been able to memorize them. Meaning that, like, if you, like, the most secure way of just having it would just be completely random password, but that isn't the best. As, like, in my interview with Tom Cunningham was saying, passphrases are a lot better because you can make them, in essence, like what they look like could be random, but the meaning behind them gives makes it less random and more memorable. And so it doesn't take you as long to like remember these long passwords if you have the phrase memorized. In our example, something about like I like to drink coffee on Saturday mornings. But yeah, stuff like that, that if you can then understand, or if you can remember the phrase and you can remember which characters come out of that as your password. And so it's a lot easier to remember, and also makes it so that you don't have to like carry around a slip of paper with your password on it, making it so if somebody knows you, they can easily grab your password. One last thing before I end this video, I was just going to point you to the ASU cybersecurity webpage if you are interested in developing this hacker mindset. They have a really good degree program. They have some pretty good resources to get you heading in the right direction. Have a nice day, and I will see you next time. Wait, who's trying to log into my bank? Someone from Russia. Huh, I'm glad we have two-factor authentication and security researchers.